All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel. The title of this panel is Bridging Worlds: How Standards Enable Seamless Connectivity in the Digital Asset Economy. And I'm personally very excited for this panel. And we have some of the world's largest firms here with us that are focusing on this very problem. How do we glue together the fragmented blockchain ecosystem into a coherent digital asset economy? And I'm Ryan Lovell, Director of Capital Markets at Chainlink. I'm delighted to be joined by Jack Pouderoyen, who is a digital asset strategy lead from Swift. Sandra Ro, CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council. And last but not least, Christoph Schneider, Head of IT Development and Operations at GLEIF. So we'll kick it off with a question to all panelists, and maybe we'll go left to right. The session is called Bridging Worlds. So in one sentence each, what worlds are your firms personally trying to bridge in your work, and why do standards now matter more than ever? We'll start with Jack.
One sentence. I think to keep to the spirit, quite frankly, it's to allow financial institutions in the regulated space to be able to leverage existing infrastructure and access the kind of the DeFi kind of tokenization-based markets as we see the direction of travel going forward in this direction.
Well done, Sandra.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you for everyone for being here. In one sentence, what are we trying to do at GBBC as the world's largest nonprofit focusing on this space is literally to bring the best of what is traditional finance and financial services infrastructure alongside and integrated into the very best of what is innovation on the DeFi and Web3 world. So, trying to make that happen here, and many of you are the builders of that.
Thank you. And one sentence is very hard. I'll try to be brief anyway. Sergey Nazarov mentioned earlier today on the stage that the financial crisis, the Lehman crisis, 2008, created Bitcoin, and it did one other thing. It motivated the G20 leaders to create the global LEI system. And almost 15 years later, it seems logical that we need a digital identity for organizations worldwide in a common, addressable way. And this is why GLEIF created the verifiable LEI, the VLEI. And you asked, why do standards matter now more than ever? Because we need a global applicability and a global interoperability for these things to be effective.
Well said. I think I'll have a follow-up question here for Jack specifically. So as I think most everyone in this room knows that Swift connects thousands of institutions globally. From your perspective, Jack, what are the key interoperability challenges between traditional financial messaging and emerging blockchain networks?
Yeah, I think, look, we've been in this this kind of journey now from a kind of a Web3 crypto space, and blockchains have been around. Ethereum was in 2015. It's 10 years already. There's been a proliferation of different types of blockchains, different types of token standards. There's even still today quite a disparity between what institutions are doing, the amount of different kind of formats that are out there. And so when we talk to institutions kind of every day, there's very clearly a challenge that they run into around kind of which blockchains should they be investing in or trying to connect to. How do they manage the overhead of trying to connect into every single one where you have kind of different use cases, different value propositions of each. Some are relevant for parts of their business, others are relevant for other parts of the business, but they just don't know, and it's still complicated. And so there's a massive challenge of trying to sort that out as a regulated institution, and then also balance what they've already invested in over multiple decades now, right? And so when we think around traditional standards, obviously kind of at Swift we're known for obviously standards as a kind of one of the primary registration authorities of ISO, but when you look at having a common kind of standardized data model as ISO 20022 and 15022 in the security side there's a lot of good kind of effort and investment that's gone in globally across the financial system. So commercial banks, central banks, market infrastructures, there's a lot there that can be tapped into and leveraged in coordination with some of these blockchains to make sure you still have a standardized way of accessing, communicating, and transferring value across blockchains as well as traditional infrastructures.
I agree with that, and even some of our work together, you would explain some blockchain transactions to folks, and then if you just say something like it's just an MT542. And they'd be like, I get it, because that's the Swift message for delivery versus payment. So you can see the power of standards, because in like a simple, short text string, people understand a very complicated financial transaction. And I think that speaks to 50 years of consistent standards from the Swift network.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Swift, we're so deeply embedded in bank and institutional back-end infrastructures and back-end systems that as soon as you can enable banks to leverage existing infrastructure that they have in place today, all of a sudden what that unlocks in terms of adoption and integration is exactly what the industry is looking for, right? And so it's something that I think works best for both sides, right? I mean, we need to see that there's a gradual path towards adoption. If you're expecting people to try and kind of develop and integrate brand new infrastructures, it's going to take a lot longer and a lot more investment. Yes.
Agreed. Next up, Sandra, question for you. So the GBBC sits at this intersection. It's actually a very cool intersection. Policymakers, enterprises, and innovators. So how do you foster kind of a global consensus around standards when you're dealing with different jurisdictions, different technologies, and they're all moving at different speeds?
Yeah. I liken the very place that we sit in this world right now as sometimes we are connectors, just connecting the dots across groups around the world. Other times we are actually diplomats. I call peacemakers sometimes, because frankly, there are lots of different arguments about terminology and how we go about developing these standards. And that's actually healthy. We're very happy to see healthy debate around how we should be looking at the future of standards for blockchain technology and beyond. And sometimes we play the role, I would say, of actually participating directly in certain projects and certain groups in order for us to actually support. Some of you may have heard earlier today the capital markets risk mitigation framework that has been launched in concert with not only Chainlink, but Swift is participating, and GLEIF, we will hopefully get you guys to participate as well. But this is, again, bringing together lots of different groups to support a global standard. Do you know why we should all care about it? It's not because it's just a nice idea. It's because anyone here who wants to scale and have this become the multi-trillion-dollar, multi-level fold industry that everyone's hoping for, which I hear a lot, you should care. So basically, I say to folks, standards have been the way we scale responsibly. And that is something that has happened in every industry, and this is no different. So I hope that helps in a nutshell explain sort of the role that we're trying to play in this space. And just for those of you who may not have seen, there was a lot of news yesterday, especially from Chainlink, but we ourselves had our own news. We've just now joined ISO TC 307, which is the blockchain committee. We have a seat at the table now to help support the adoption and more accelerated adoption of blockchain standards through that particular group. So stay tuned for more.
How do you kind of, Sandra, work with, like, you know, I feel like the last several years, different jurisdictions have had different pace. Like, I think 3 years ago, we would always say, look at the MAS Guardian framework. They're very ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
But how would you say people or at least jurisdictions are learning from each other? Because they're all learning at different paces. And what's your kind of role in tying that together?
So I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I will give the more optimistic and positive view of what's going on. There is a lot for regulators to take in, but they are talking to each other at a level that I think, I'm a former banker, I had never seen in TradFi. Like, we are seeing the level of coordination that outside of a crisis. Crisis, yes, they will get together, but we don't want them getting together necessarily because of a crisis. We want them getting together while we have times of like contemplation and actual debate that we could have around how do we harmonize these things. I agree with you. People are at different paces, you know, in evolution of understanding and thinking. However, the coordination across regulators should not be underestimated. It is happening. It's just certain regulators have more resources, capacity building, and ability to spend their time on crypto or digital assets, which, by the way, is usually a very small piece of their overall mandate within a given jurisdiction. So let's be a little bit empathetic to, like, crypto might be and digital assets might be our world. but that is only one piece of their larger responsibility. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to continue that dialogue, and the public-private sector conversations that are happening are pretty amazing, and we should all be encouraging more of that in every jurisdiction.
That's good to hear. Christoph, so GLEIF has long worked as a legal identity identifier. I think most firms know what LEI is. What's your LEI? What's your LEI? Let me onboard you with your LEI. And now that digital identity plays a growing role in the blockchain ecosystem, how can identity standards anchor trust and compliance in this multi-chain fragmented world?
Yeah, so the VLEI had always interoperability at its core from the beginning. And of course, there are many blockchain solutions, some for very specific use cases. And if we wanted to solve digital organizational identity for each of them individually, we would not only have to repeat all the know your customer, know your supplier, know your whatever work, but also everybody who wanted to use it needed to understand and be able to use all these different mechanisms. So a global standard for digital organizational identity can help to solve the organizational identity needs of any blockchain ecosystem.
And I think you're solving a very key problem, because as most people in this room know, a public blockchain address is just a random string with numbers and letters in there. And I think, Christoph, some of your work in basically be able to create reusable credentials that are on-chain, I think is very powerful, and I think can solve a lot of problems going forward. So congrats on all the work made so far with GLEIF and the VLEI.
Thank you very much.
Next question I have is for all panelists once again. And standards can drive scale, but they also can risk slowing down innovation. So how do we find the right timing, setting standards early enough to guide the market, but not so early that they eventually become obsolete in 2 to 3 years? And maybe we'll go left to right.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of the kind of the timing, the evolution of it, right? So I mean, to your point, you can't set standards so early that it prevents innovation from happening. I think there's a hugely important part that's kind of tied into innovation, experimentation, testing this out with the market, and that's something that we've certainly kind of taken that type of approach. We've done a number of proofs of concept with the people on the stage, many in the audience and global institutions over the past couple of years, and through those experiments, through those proof of concepts, we've landed around key upgrades that need to actually be kind of integrated into existing standards, for example. So when you look at ISO 20022, yes, it's a long-standing kind of financial messaging or standard or data model, but actually we've been spending time since I think 2021 or 2022 to actually enhance that to include various kind of blockchain data elements that are necessary to transact in digital assets and tokenized assets. And all that's informed through the experiments that we've done. So when you think around incorporating now data fields for blockchain wallet addresses, digital token identifiers, greater denomination to account for the fractionalization of tokens, different blockchain ledgers as new places of settlement, we wouldn't have gotten to that level of richness had we not spent the time getting our hands dirty. And now going forward, it's the same thing. And how do we kind of evolve that into the next level, right? And so we're doing work right now we have a prototype that we demoed about a month ago at Sibos around a new standardization platform for digital assets where we can align around defining business functions with the community. So we've been working with some of the major CSDs, DTCC, Euroclear, Clearstream on this. How do we then also define the functions and the interactions that would be how people would actually interact with digital assets, and then create effectively a repository where different reference implementations around how you actually then manifest in technical token form these different digital assets can be implemented onto different blockchains in a technology agnostic way. Again, this is something that you need to spend the time and kind of getting your hands dirty with. So more to come on that, but I think there's the huge piece at the end is you then need to get to a point where you have these standards to actually drive scale, as Sandra pointed out before.
So if we generally believe the world, no matter what tech we use, has to have an element of trust in order for us to interact and transact with each other, risk management and especially at this time of maturity, we are ready to look at risk management from a positive standpoint, which is it is a actual benefit to business for us to put in risk management practices, to come up with standards and sound practices, to then grow and elevate the conversation to a level of maturity, I would argue, that actually makes it a positive. So I understand the question marks around doing things too early, and I would agree, like putting in standards before things are really baked in, but I do believe now we are either at that tipping point or getting very close to it, or we need to accelerate the standards discussion as well as the risk management discussion, because that will foster the trust that we also need to keep building. And I want to thank Chainlink in particular, Ryan, you, but also the Chainlink team, because standards usually sit in backwaters of a panel discussion somewhere else, and they've made it a major feature because it needs to be. And so I applaud you guys for doing that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And finally, Christoph.
I join Sandra in thanking for putting us on the main stage. And I truly believe that standards are essential to drive scale because they are foundational for interoperability of fast-moving players. Standards ensure that the core aspects of an innovation are ensured and not sacrificed just to move fast, because doing the wrong thing fast does not create value. Regarding standards too early, of course, nobody needs premature optimization, but I believe standards have also shown their ability to be adaptable over time. I give the example of ISO 17442, the LEI standard. It started out just to be the standard of the code and the reference data elements and the scope of the identifier. And several years later, it was extended with a part 2 about LEIs in digital certificates and the first way to do digital identity with the VLEI. With the LEI. And then part 3, the VLEI, added the standards about the VLEI. So standards are not static and can evolve along the way.
Yeah, and I see this theme of, a lot of these things aren't necessarily new standards. We're not creating new standards. We're figuring out how to take long-standing existing standards and make them compatible with this new technology. And I think this panel is a great display and exhibition of 3 different firms and how we're actually doing that in practice. And maybe as a final question, which is a forward-looking question, and this is for all panelists, if we meet again next year, what visible signs of progress would tell you that we're truly operating in a connected, standards-based asset economy? And maybe a follow-up on that is, do you think a year is enough to show tangible progress? Or is this going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years? So I'll start with Jack.
Let's go reverse order for the first.
We start over here? OK. I think 3 concrete signs for me. First would be adoption of global recognized identifiers of digital identities. Number 2 would be cross-network transactions based on common data and trust frameworks. And number 3, regulatory and market alignment on interoperability standards. And very importantly, if we can see these in action and we just don't get together here talking about them, then I see this happening. Do I expect this to happen within 1 year? Perhaps not completely, but I think we will have considerable progress based, for example, on the collaboration that has been announced recently with Chainlink and GLEIF, where we have now an integration of the VLEI with the CCID on Chainlink, and these are steps to making this happen in reality.
I will piggyback off of what Christoph said and say we'll have a couple of concrete things to look forward to in the next year. One is what the work that GLEIF is doing is being integrated across many other different discussions, including our own. So that integration on the VLEI point will continue to deepen, and you'll just see GLEIF everywhere. And that's just going to be a pervasive, ubiquitous thing. That's number 1. Number 2, from a standards work that we are doing, you will see much more out of us related to tangibles on technical partners building on top of the framework. Because the reality is, if you put a framework out there and no one uses it, so what? And the regulators like it, but they don't actually go and adopt it to actually have their jurisdictions push it out. That's like, what's the point? So the utility you will start seeing. Where did we start? Infrastructure. Now we're going to do on-chain digital payments risk mitigation. The third layer in 2026 is crypto assets, native crypto assets. So all of that comes together in a package, and yeah, it will get done in the next year. So you can hold me to that for next year. And then the final piece, when I mention utility, it is about building businesses on top. So whether Chainlink is bringing together all their partners to come up with compliance solutions, and then we are also helping to support, underpin some of the risk frameworks around that. We all need to figure out commonality of bringing those things together, and you'll see much more of that integration.
Yeah, I think from our perspective at the Swift side and the institutions we work with, I think next year we'll have a kind of a working MVP of this kind of standardization platform hub that I mentioned before. I do think we'll see notable progress within a year, but it's going to be an evolution over a number of years, and I think there's going to be a very clear focus on specific assets, specific kind of use cases, and specific players. And in particular, as we look at some of the larger market infrastructure entities that drive a tremendous, maybe disproportionate amount of value and volumes throughout the ecosystem, because they have such an important role in the global financial system. And so you can really anchor around specific use cases and volumes. So I do think we're going to see some material movement in some of these places, and as well as we look at kind of certain kind of token formats or certain blockchains, right? Because of course, there's still a litany of different technologies, different kind of tech, kind of blockchain layers and token formats out there. So I do think it's going to could also happen in a bit of an evolved cadence.
Agreed. Well, thank you all for our fantastic panelists for sharing your views, and thank you all for joining our session. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.